My name is Marcus James Mitchell. I'm 43 years old now, and I'm about to tell you the story that has defined the last 12 years of my life. But to understand that story, you need to understand where it came from. You need to understand a man named Richard Mitchell, who built something, who became something, who in the process of becoming something, forgot how to be someone. My father was born in 1947 in Toledo, Ohio. His father worked at a General Motors factory. His mother was a nurse. They had 2 children, my father and an uncle I never met, who died in a car accident when I was 3. My grandfather drank beer on Sundays and read the newspaper every morning before work. My grandmother was quiet in the way that women of her generation were taught to be quiet, not because they had nothing to say, but because they'd learned that the world wasn't particularly interested in hearing them. Richard Mitchell was different from his father. Where his father was content with the factory, with the predictable paycheck, with the life that had been laid out for him, Richard was burning with something else. He was burning with the need to prove something. To become something. To transcend the circumstances he'd been born into. He was a quiet burning, though. That's important to understand. My father's ambition was not the loud kind. He didn't talk about his dreams or his plans or where he was going. He just worked. He just climbed. He just moved forward with the kind of relentless focus that makes other people uncomfortable because they can't quite figure out what you're after. When he was 18, he went to Ohio State University on a partial scholarship. He studied business. He lived in a dorm with 3 other roommates in a space that was probably no bigger than 10 by 12 feet. He worked 40 hours a week at a logistics company while going to school full-time. He didn't date. He didn't party. He didn't do any of the things that 18-year-old boys are supposed to do. He graduated in 1969, and by 1970, he was working as a manager at Midwest Transport, a mid-sized logistics company based in Columbus. This was when logistics was still a relatively new concept, the idea that you could track packages in real time, that you could know where something was at any moment, that you could manage supply chains with precision rather than hope. My father understood something about logistics that most people didn't. He understood that logistics wasn't really about moving things. It was about information. It was about knowing. It was about the person who sent something wanted to be reassured that it was being handled correctly. They wanted to know. They wanted control. So he built a system. It was the late 1970s, and computers were still rare and expensive and somewhat miraculous. But my father convinced his bosses at Midwest Transport to let him design a computer tracking system. It took 2 years. It cost more money than they'd budgeted for. But when it was finished, it worked. Midwest Transport's business increased by 40% in the first year. My father was promoted. He was given a raise. He was given a corner office with a window that looked out on Columbus. But he wasn't satisfied. Because he understood something else. The system he'd built belonged to Midwest Transport, and the credit belonged to Midwest Transport. He would never be more than an employee. He would never be the thing he was burning to be, which was an owner. A builder. A man who had created something from nothing. So in 1985, at the age of 38, Richard Mitchell left Midwest Transport. He took a loan from a bank, a significant loan, a risky loan, a loan that would have destroyed him if his system hadn't worked. He took that loan and he started Mitchell Logistics. He worked out of a strip mall on the outskirts of Columbus. He had 2 employees, himself and a woman named Patricia who answered phones and handled paperwork. He had contracts with 3 small retailers who were willing to take a chance on his system. Within 5 years, He had 43 employees and contracts with 6 major retailers. Within 10 years, he had 200 employees, offices in 5 states, and revenue that exceeded $50 million annually. This is when he met my mother. Catherine Marie Yates came from money. Not enormous money, not the kind of money that makes you unable to relate to normal people. But comfortable money. The kind of money that allows you to grow up knowing that certain doors are available, that certain opportunities are possible, that certain failures are survivable because there's always a safety net underneath. Her father was a banker. Her mother was a philanthropist, which in Columbus in the 1970s meant she sat on boards and organized charity galas and used her position of social privilege to do quiet good in the world. Catherine grew up in a large house with gardens. She went to private schools. She had piano lessons and French lessons and ballet lessons. She was trained, in the way that young women of her class were trained, to be gracious, to be beautiful, to be a complement to a man's life rather than a life in her own right. But Catherine was smart. She was genuinely intelligent in a way that her education had tried to smooth away but hadn't quite succeeded. She read books that weren't assigned to her. She asked questions that made people uncomfortable. She had opinions about things that young women weren't supposed to have opinions about. By the time she was 25, she was running a non-profit organization that dealt with housing for homeless people. It was meaningful work. It was work that mattered. It was work that contradicted everything she'd been raised to believe about her proper role in society. She met my father at a banker's dinner in 1979. This was the kind of event that Catherine's mother made her attend, networking events where you were supposed to let the men do the talking and the women do the supporting. Catherine was there because it was expected of her. My father was there as the guest of a business associate. He was out of place. He was a man who had climbed from nothing, and he moved through the room like he was still hungry, still climbing, still looking for the next thing. According to my mother, and I only know this because she told me once, after she'd had a glass of wine at Christmas, my father was the only person at that entire event who didn't ask her father any questions about banking. Instead, he asked her about a book she was carrying. Some novel she can't even remember the name of now. He didn't want to know about money, she said. He wanted to know about the book. I was so surprised that I actually told him the truth about what I thought of it. I was so surprised that he listened. They dated for 2 years. My father didn't move fast. He was methodical about everything, including romance. He would take my mother to dinner once a week, always on the same night, Thursday. He would pick her up at 6 and have her home by 11. He would hold her hand sometimes, but rarely kiss her. He seemed to be evaluating whether she fit into whatever vision he had of his future. On New Year's Eve 1981, my father took my mother to a hotel restaurant in Columbus. They had dinner. They had drinks. And then, as the clock was approaching midnight, my father put a small box on the table. "I'm going to build something," he said. "I need someone who won't try to stop me." My mother opened the box. There was a ring. According to her, she cried. But she also said yes. They got married in June of 1982. My mother wore a white dress. My father wore a suit. There were 200 people at the reception. My father's mother was there, proud and quiet. My mother's family was there, concerned and wondering whether their daughter had made a mistake. My sister Sarah was born 9 months after the wedding. This was never discussed in our family. It simply existed as a fact that everyone knew and nobody mentioned. My mother was pregnant before they were married. This was not scandalous exactly, it was 1981, not 1951, but it was evidence that my father had not waited, that he had moved forward with his plan regardless of social convention, that he would do what needed to be done to get what he wanted. I was born 7 years later, in 1988, when my father's company was already established, already successful, already the thing that mattered most to him. Sarah was a beautiful baby. This is what people said. Sarah has my mother's dark hair and my father's sharp features. Sarah was precocious. Sarah was advanced. Sarah was the kind of child who seemed to know, from birth, that she was special. My father paid attention to Sarah in a way that he didn't pay attention to most things. He would sit with her while she did her homework. He would attend her school events. He would take her to the office sometimes, on Saturday mornings, and let her sit at a desk and feel like she was part of something important. My mother loved Sarah fiercely. The way that mothers love their first children, with the intensity of someone who is experiencing motherhood for the first time, who is amazed by the fact that this small human exists, who invests everything into making sure that this small human knows they are loved. By the time Sarah was 5, it was clear that she would be exceptional. She was reading at a level several grades ahead of her age. She was winning competitions. She was the kind of child who made teachers use words like gifted and advanced and remarkable. My father was pleased by this. Not in an emotional way, my father was rarely emotional about anything. But in a satisfied way. In a way that suggested he'd created something good. In a way that suggested his genetic contribution had been worthwhile. When I was born, 7 years later, things shifted. Not dramatically, but subtly. My father was still present. My mother was still loving. But the energy in the family changed. Sarah had been the entire focus of my parents' world. Now there was me. Now there was another child who needed things, who required attention, who was not automatically exceptional but just a baby. Just a human who cried and spit up and needed diaper changes. I don't remember much of being an infant. I remember fragments. I remember my mother's hands. I remember the light through windows. I remember the feeling of being held and knowing I was safe. But I also remember, even from very young, understanding that I was second. That Sarah was the experiment that worked. That I was something else. Something less urgent. Something less important. My sister didn't resent me for existing. This is important. Sarah was never cruel to me because she'd been displaced by a younger sibling. In fact, Sarah was kind to me. She would read to me. She would help me with my homework. She would protect me from other kids who might have tried to bully me. But she was also, from the beginning, the one who mattered more. And we both knew it. When I was 3 years old, my family moved into a new house. It was a large house, not enormous, but substantial. It was a Tudor-style house built in 1952, with 6 bedrooms, a library, a formal dining room, a kitchen that was probably the largest kitchen in our neighborhood, and a driveway that curved. My father chose the house. He chose it because it communicated something. It communicated that he had made it. It communicated that he had climbed from nothing to something. It communicated that he had proven his worth in the currency that mattered most, money. The house was beautiful. I can say that objectively. It had good bones. It had character. It had the kind of aesthetic that came from being built in an era when craftsmanship mattered. But it was also very cold. Every room was designed to be looked at rather than lived in. Every space had a purpose, and that purpose was mostly to impress people who came to visit. My mother tried to make the house into a home. She filled it with art and books and plants. She organized the kitchen so that it could actually be used. She created spaces where people could sit and be comfortable. But there was only so much you could do with a house that had been designed as a monument to success rather than as a place to actually live. My father had an office on the second floor, at the end of a hallway, past 3 other bedrooms and a bathroom. The office was large, probably 18 by 20 feet. It had a massive mahogany desk. It had bookshelves on every wall. It had a window that looked out over the neighborhood. It had a door that closed. He spent most of his time in that office. He would go in there after dinner and not emerge until morning. Sometimes he would be working on business matters. Sometimes he would just be sitting there, thinking, processing, planning the next thing. I would walk past that office sometimes late at night, when I couldn't sleep, when I was thirsty, when I just needed to move around. I would see light under the door. I would hear the sound of papers rustling or his fingers on a keyboard. But I never opened the door. It didn't occur to me to open it. That door was a barrier that understood itself. It had the authority of a locked gate. Sarah's bedroom was on the same hallway, closer to the master bedroom where our parents slept. My bedroom was on the other end of the hallway, further away, more isolated. This was not discussed as a conscious decision. This was just how the rooms had been assigned. But it communicated something. It communicated hierarchy. It communicated who was important enough to be near the center of the family's life. My mother spent most of her time managing the house. She had a housekeeper who came in 3 days a week. She had a gardener who maintained the grounds. She had a woman who came twice a week to handle the laundry. But despite this, my mother was constantly busy. She was supervising. She was checking. She was making sure that everything maintained the appearance of effortless grace that large houses require. She was also involved in her non-profit work. She sat on the boards of several organizations. She attended fundraising galas. She did volunteer work at the homeless shelter that she'd founded. She poured her intelligence and her education and her considerable organizational skills into making the world slightly better for people who had less than she did. And yet, somehow, she was always available when we needed her. If we had a problem, she would stop whatever she was doing and help us. If we were struggling, she would sit with us until we felt better. If we needed her, she was there. This was love. This was what love looked like in my family. It looked like a mother who had other things to do but who chose to make us her priority anyway. When Sarah was 11, she started at Lakeside Academy, a private school that was expensive and competitive and designed to turn 11-year-old girls into 25-year-old woman executives. Lakeside Academy was not primarily concerned with education, though education happened there. It was primarily concerned with positioning. It was concerned with teaching young women how to network, how to position themselves, how to understand that life was a series of transactions and strategic choices. Sarah excelled at this immediately. She understood the game. She knew which teachers to impress. She knew how to volunteer at the right moments. She knew how to present herself in a way that suggested she was destined for bigger and better things. By the time she was 15, she was the president of 3 clubs, the editor-in-chief of the school newspaper, and the clear heir apparent to a student government position that wouldn't exist for another year because the school would create it specifically for her to run. My father attended some of her events. Not many, but some. I remember him sitting in an audience at a debate competition, stone-faced, watching our sister articulate some argument about water rights or congressional procedure or whatever the debate topic was that year. And when she won, which she did almost every time she competed, he would nod. Just nod. He would stand and clap appropriately, but there was something in his face that suggested he'd never doubted that she would win, that her victory was simply the natural outcome of his genetic contribution and his careful cultivation of her potential. My mother attended all of her events. She would sit in the audience and her face would have a look of such fierce pride that it seemed like she might burst. When Sarah won something, which was often, my mother would cry. Happy tears, proud tears, the tears of someone who had invested everything in another person and was finally seeing returns. I remember sitting next to my mother at one of these events. I think it was a debate competition, though I'm not entirely certain, and I remember the feeling of being invisible. Not angry invisible. Not resentful invisible. Just the natural invisibility of being the younger sibling of someone who was exceptional. When I started at Lakeside Academy 5 years later, it was understood that I would not be a Sarah. Not because I wasn't smart enough, though there was probably some element of that, but because I was fundamentally disinterested in the game that Sarah had mastered. I did well in school. I got good grades. But I didn't join clubs. I didn't run for student government. I didn't cultivate relationships with teachers or build resumes or do any of the dozens of subtle things that Lakeside Academy had been designed to teach us to do. Instead, I read books. I worked on cars in the garage with a man named William who'd worked for my father's company for years and had taken to mentoring me in the ways of engines and transmissions and mechanical systems. I spent time at home, helping my mother with projects around the house, actually engaging with the work of maintaining a life rather than the performance of it. My father noticed this. I could tell he noticed because he said to my mother once, when he thought I wasn't listening, "The boy is going to be a disappointment." I don't think he meant it cruelly. I think he meant it as a simple prediction, the way someone might predict the weather. The boy is going to be a disappointment, just like a person might say, "It's going to rain tomorrow." My mother defended me. "He's kind," she said. "He's thoughtful." "Those aren't marketable qualities," my father replied. This conversation shaped something in me. It took a formless anxiety, the anxiety of a teenager who doesn't quite fit, and gave it a specific form. I was disappointing. My existence was a disappointment. Not because I was bad or failing, but because I was not what was expected, and the expectation was the only currency that mattered in our family. By the time Sarah was 17, it was clear that she would go into business. There was no other option that she or our father ever discussed. Not medicine, not law, not academia. Business. Something that could be measured, quantified, grown. She applied to 3 universities, Harvard, Yale, and Duke. She was accepted to all 3. She chose Yale because, she said, Yale understood that business was about people, and Harvard was for people who thought business was about numbers. This was a very Sarah thing to say. It suggested sophistication without actually saying anything substantive. But it impressed people, which was all it needed to do. My father took her to campus for orientation. Just him and Sarah. My mother stayed home. I stayed home. It was a father-daughter trip, a rite of passage, a moment that seemed to seal something that had been true all along. Sarah was the child who mattered. I was 14 when Sarah left for Yale. I remember the day she packed her car, a Volvo that our father had given her for high school graduation. It was a practical car, the kind of car that a teenager who would go to Yale would drive. Not showy. Expensive in an understated way. My mother helped her pack. I watched from Sarah's bedroom doorway. Sarah's room had always been her sanctuary, a place where she practiced being the person she was going to become. The walls were covered with pictures of her at competitions, at events, receiving awards. There was a college pennant for Yale already hanging above her bed, even though she hadn't graduated high school yet. "You're going to do wonderful things," my mother said, folding a sweater. You know that, right? You're going to go to Yale, and you're going to do wonderful things. I hope so, Sarah said. And she meant it. There was no false modesty in her voice. There was just the simple confidence of someone who had been told repeatedly that she was special and had eventually come to believe it. My mother hugged her for a long time. The kind of hug that contains a whole relationship, all the invested hope, all the pride, all the love that had been poured into making Sarah who she was. When they separated, my mother was crying. I'll call you, Sarah said. From school. I'll call you. Every day? My mother asked, only half joking. As often as I can, Sarah said. My father drove her to New Haven. He came back 3 days later without Sarah. He didn't mention the trip. I remember him sitting at the dinner table that evening, eating my mother's cooking, and asking about the business, about work, about everything except the daughter he'd just left at Yale. Sarah's time at Yale was transformative, though not in the way that college is supposed to be transformative. It wasn't transformative because of learning or growth or intellectual awakening. It was transformative because Sarah learned, definitively and completely, that the world would reward her for being exactly what she was: ambitious, strategic, calculating. She joined the debate club. She became involved with student government. She secured an internship at a consulting firm sophomore year. By junior year, she had a job offer from McKinsey. By senior year, she was applying to business schools, not because she needed one, McKinsey was enough, but because going to business school was what successful Yale undergraduates did. She chose Wharton. Full ride. Top of her class. My father attended her graduation from Yale. I remember him coming home with a specific quality of satisfaction on his face, not pride, exactly, but something like the satisfaction of a carpenter who's completed a particularly difficult project. My mother cried when Sarah graduated. She cried with an intensity that suggested she understood something that Sarah didn't, that this was the end of something. That Sarah was now moving into a world that would require things of her that a mother couldn't help with, that a mother couldn't protect her from. During Sarah's time at Yale and Wharton, I was growing up. I was going through the normal teenage stuff: school, relationships, trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted and whether I was ever going to be enough. The answer, by the time I was 18, seemed to be no. I was never going to be ambitious enough, never going to climb high enough, never going to become the kind of person that my father could point to with pride. So I stopped trying. I went to a state school, Ohio State, and I studied something practical but not impressive. I got decent grades, but I didn't push myself to get exceptional grades. I didn't network. I didn't position myself. I just went to school and graduated, and then I looked for a job. I found one as a mail carrier. The postal service was hiring. It was stable work. It had benefits. It was the kind of job that my father would never have had, that he would have considered beneath him, that represented everything he'd worked to escape. I took the job anyway. And when I told my family that I was going to be a postal worker, the reaction was silence, mostly. My father didn't say anything. My mother tried to be supportive, but there was an undercurrent of disappointment in her voice. Sarah was away at business school, so I don't remember what she said exactly, but I remember it being kind but also slightly pitying, like she was trying to be nice to a younger sibling who was making what she clearly thought was a mistake. I moved out of my parents' house when I was 22. I got an apartment in Columbus. It was a modest apartment, 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a kitchen that was big enough to cook in. I furnished it with things I liked rather than things that impressed people. I made it a home rather than a showpiece. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to be away from the weight of my family's expectations. My mother got sick when I was 31. She was 65 years old. She was still doing her non-profit work. She was still involved in community organizations. She was still a presence in my life and Sarah's life, even though Sarah was now based in Philadelphia and I was in Columbus. At first, nobody realized how sick she was. She was tired, but she'd always been a person who pushed herself, who did too much, who wasn't great at listening to her own body's signals. Then she had a small stroke. She recovered from it, but it was a warning. It was the universe saying, "Your time is running out. Pay attention." My father became different after that. He became more present, paradoxically. The man who'd spent 30 years in his study, working on business matters, suddenly found himself needing to help manage my mother's health. He took her to doctor's appointments. He listened to the doctors explain her condition. He sat with her while she recovered. I think he was scared. I think he understood, for the first time, that the thing he'd been working toward, success, achievement, the building of an empire, wasn't actually going to matter when the person he loved was sick. But he didn't know how to express that. He wasn't a man who could say, "I'm scared. I love you. I'm sorry for all the years I wasn't present." He was just a man who showed up. Who was there. Who sat in hospital waiting rooms and tried to be what my mother needed. My mother, for her part, didn't blame him for the years of absence. She seemed to understand, at 65, with health problems, that blame was less important than presence. She seemed to understand that he had done the best he could with the personality and the drives that he'd been given. My sister came home sometimes, but not often. She was busy with her career. She had just been promoted to director of a major initiative at her consulting firm. She had responsibilities. She had obligations. She couldn't just take time off whenever our mother needed her. So it fell to me. I used my vacation time. I drove to my parents' house. I sat with my mother while my father worked. I listened to her talk about her life, about her regrets, about the things she wished she'd done differently. "I wish I'd been braver," she told me once. "I wish I hadn't let myself become so consumed with managing everyone else's lives. I had my own life to live." "You did a lot of good," I said. "The non-profit, the community work, you made a difference." "I did," she said. "But it was often a substitute for doing the things I actually wanted to do." Do you understand what I mean? I think I did. I think my mother had taken her considerable talents and directed them toward supporting my father's ambition and managing the household and raising children. And while those were important things, they weren't the things that she would have chosen for herself if she'd actually been brave enough to choose for herself. "What would you have done differently?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe that's the worst part. Not that I didn't do the things I wanted to do, but that I never figured out what those things actually were." My mother died on March 18, 2019. She was 71 years old. She had a stroke at home in the kitchen, actually, where so much of her life had happened, where I had so many of my memories of her. I was at work that day. I was delivering mail on my usual route, a part of Columbus that had become as familiar to me as my own apartment. I knew the houses, the people, the rhythms of the day. I was in a predictable groove. I was comfortable. My father called me. This was unusual. We didn't call each other. We didn't have that kind of relationship. But he called, and his voice was different. It was shaking. It was small. "Your mother has had a stroke," he said. "She's at Ohio State Medical Center. You need to come now." I left my mail truck with a coworker and drove to the hospital. It took me 20 minutes. Every minute felt like an hour, the way minutes do when your life is about to change and you're heading toward that change without knowing exactly what shape it will take. My father was in the waiting room when I arrived. He looked like someone had removed the skeleton from his body and forgot to put it back in. He was sitting in a chair, staring at nothing, waiting for information the way a man waits when he's been told his wife might not survive the day. "She's stable," he said when he saw me. "It was a major stroke, left side of the brain. They're doing imaging now. They won't know the full extent of the damage until tomorrow." "Can I see her?" I asked. "Not yet. Doctors are with her." We sat in the waiting room. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say. We were both processing the fact that the woman who held our family together was suddenly not available to hold anything together. We were both understanding that our family, as it had existed, was fundamentally changed. Sarah arrived 2 hours later. She was living in Philadelphia at that time, working at a consulting firm, still climbing the ladder that had been laid out for her since childhood. She'd been in a client meeting when my father called her. She'd left immediately, gotten in her car, driven 3 hours at speeds that probably violated several traffic laws. When she walked into the waiting room, she looked like she was in control of a situation. She was composed, efficient, already taking mental notes about what needed to happen next. She hugged me, a brief hug, the kind that people give when they don't really know each other, and then she turned to my father. "What are the doctors saying?" she asked, addressing him. "It's early. They won't know the full extent until morning." "Okay. What's the protocol? What happens next?" My father explained the protocol. My sister took notes. She asked clarifying questions. She seemed to organize the crisis into something manageable through the simple act of information gathering. We waited. The hospital held us in its fluorescent limbo, not day, not night, just the strange timelessness of a place where people's lives change. Around midnight, a doctor came out and said we could see her. My mother was in a hospital bed in an ICU room. She was alive, which was something. She was also not alive in a way that was harder to articulate. She was present but not present, conscious but not conscious. She had tubes in her arms and a breathing assistance thing that made a rhythmic sound. The left side of her body didn't move. The right side moved fractionally, without direction or purpose. I remember standing at the foot of her bed and thinking that this was not my mother. My mother was the woman who moved with intention, who orchestrated the lives of other people through careful management of schedules and expectations and love. This thing in the bed was a body that resembled her, but my mother, the actual woman, was already gone. My father sat in a chair next to the bed. He held her hand. I remember being shocked by this. I had never seen him hold her hand. I had never seen him touch her with gentleness. But he sat there, holding her hand, and his face had the expression of someone who was finally, for the first time, engaged with his life. Sarah made phone calls. She called her boss. She explained that there was a family emergency. She outlined what was happening. She arranged to work remotely for the next week, then took a leave of absence. We stayed at the hospital in shifts. My father stayed at night. Sarah and I stayed during the day. We sat and waited for something that might not come, for some sign that the woman in the bed was still in there somewhere. On the third day, my mother had another stroke. The doctors called it a major event. She didn't wake up after that one. She stopped responding to stimuli. Her brain, the thing that had orchestrated her entire life, was shutting down room by room. The doctors gave us the options. We could keep her on life support indefinitely, or we could let her go. My father made the decision without consulting us. He said, "Let her go," and it was such a simple thing to say, but it contained everything: all the years of not understanding her, of taking her for granted, of letting her maintain the life that he had built while he was off building something else. My mother died on March 22, 2019. 5 days after the first stroke. I was holding her hand when she died. Sarah was in the waiting room. My father was standing at the window, looking out at Columbus in the spring, at a city that continued on as if nothing had happened. The doctors asked if we wanted to say goodbye. We said yes, but what we did was just stand there, looking at her body, understanding that the goodbye had happened a long time ago, maybe years ago, and we were just now catching up to that fact. My mother's funeral was on a Saturday in March. It rained. People came from all over, friends from college, neighbors, people she'd known from her volunteer work at the church and the library and the historical society. 132 people. I remember my father counting them, as if the number of people attending was some kind of metric of success. Sarah delivered a eulogy. She spoke about our mother's grace, her kindness, her dedication to her family. She spoke about how our mother had always been there, always present, always putting other people's needs before her own. Sarah cried during the eulogy, real tears, and everyone in the church cried with her. When it was over, my father shook hands with people. He accepted condolences. He arranged the reception. He moved through the motions of mourning with the efficiency he brought to everything else. I don't remember delivering a eulogy. I don't remember speaking at all. I remember standing in the church, listening to my sister describe a woman I recognized but didn't quite know, a version of my mother that had been simplified and elegized into something more admirable than the actual, complicated woman who had raised me. After the funeral, Sarah went back to Philadelphia. She'd taken a week off work. She'd used up her bereavement time. Life had to go on, and the machinery of her career had to keep moving. My father and I were left alone in the house. For 6 months after my mother's death, we inhabited that space together without really connecting. He worked. I worked. We ate dinner at different times. We didn't talk about our mother. We didn't talk about much of anything. He seemed to be waiting for something. I realize now that he was waiting for the thing that would happen next, the business matter, the practical issue, the next thing that needed to be managed. My mother's death was a crisis that had resolved itself into just another thing that had happened. He was ready to move on. But I wasn't ready. I was 31 years old and I was grieving my mother, which meant I was also grieving my father, because his grief had disappeared me in a way that made it very clear what I was worth in his economy of love. 6 months after my mother's death, my father died. He had a heart attack at 6 in the morning on August 10, 2019. He was in his study, sitting at his desk, probably working on something related to Mitchell Logistics. The housekeeper found him when she came in at 7. She called 911, but he was already gone. When the general counsel of Mitchell Logistics called me to tell me that my father was dead, I think I already knew. There's something in the universe that announces death before it's confirmed. Some shift in the atmospheric pressure. Some change in the quality of light. I'm very sorry, the general counsel said. Your father was a remarkable man. We're going to miss him. I thought about saying something, but I couldn't think of anything to say, so I just said, thank you, and hung up. Sarah called me an hour later. She was in a meeting. She stepped out to call me. That's who my sister was, someone who could step out of a meeting to acknowledge that our father had died. Did you hear? She asked. Yeah. Where are you? Work. Can you take the rest of the day off? Yeah. I'm driving up from Philadelphia. I'll be there in 3 hours. We need to meet with his lawyer. She hung up. Just like that. There was a plan now. There were things that needed to be done. Sarah would handle them. I drove to my parents' house. Our parents' house, technically, though it had been my parents' house for so long that I still thought of it that way, even though my mother was dead and my father was dead and the house was now just a place. I let myself in. The housekeeper was there, crying quietly in the kitchen. She asked if I wanted tea. I said no. I went upstairs to my father's study. The study was exactly as my father had left it. His desk was arranged the way he'd arranged it. Papers were everywhere. His computer was on, sleeping. Everything suggested that he'd just stepped out and would return any minute. I sat in his chair, the chair where he'd spent most of his life, the chair where he'd probably been sitting when his heart had decided it was done, and I looked at the papers on his desk. There were business documents, mostly. Emails printed out. Correspondence with various business associates. My father was a man who liked physical paper. He didn't trust the digital world. He printed everything and organized it manually, which meant his study looked like a tornado had hit a law library. I was looking through the papers, not really knowing what I was looking for, when I found it. There was a manila envelope labeled personal on the corner of the desk. I picked it up. Inside was my father's will. The will was dated June 2015. It was 4 pages long. It was written in language that a regular person could understand, which surprised me because my father usually made everything unnecessarily complicated. To my wife, Catherine, it began. I leave my house and $3 million in liquid assets. My mother was dead. She'd been dead for 5 months, so those assets, that house, that money would not go to her. They would go to the estate. They would be redistributed according to probate law. They would go to my sister and me. The will continued, to my daughter Sarah, I leave full ownership and control of Mitchell Logistics, and all assets related to that business. I have instructed my business partner to value the company at market rate and to facilitate Sarah's transition into full ownership. I had to read that part 3 times before it made sense. My father was leaving his company, the thing he'd spent 34 years building, the thing that was the center of everything in our family, the thing that had taken priority over his wife and his children and his own health, to my sister. To my son Marcus, the will continued, I leave his share of the remaining estate, including the family house minus the bequest to Catherine, and investment portfolios valued at approximately $3 million. His share. The remaining estate. The thing that was left after Sarah got what mattered. I did some quick math in my head. My father had sold his company to a private equity firm in early August, which I'd known about in a vague way, but not in detail. The sale price was $28 million. According to the will, all of that, or at least the vast majority of it, belonged to Sarah. I was going to get roughly $3 million and a house that was already mortgaged and full of painful memories. Sarah was going to get $28 million and the validation that she had always been the one who mattered. I sat in that study for an hour. Maybe longer. I don't actually know. Time did something weird. I could hear the clock ticking. I could hear the traffic outside. I could hear the housekeeper moving around downstairs. But I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I could only sit there and understand, very clearly, that my father had been judging me my entire life, and his judgment had been final. After an hour, or maybe longer, I put the will back in the envelope. I put the envelope back on my father's desk, in exactly the same place where I'd found it. And I made a decision. I decided not to tell anyone about the will. Not my sister. Not my father's lawyer. Not anyone. I decided to keep it secret and let the lawyer present it to everyone else at the official meeting. I don't know exactly why I made this decision. I've spent 7 years trying to understand it, trying to analyze it, trying to figure out what part of my psyche decided that silence was the right response to this information. I think part of it was anger. I was angry at my father for dying before I could confront him about how little I'd mattered to him. I was angry at my sister for being the golden child, for accepting the validation that my father had offered her, for seeming to believe that she deserved everything while I deserved less. I was angry at my mother for dying, for leaving me alone with a man who had never figured out how to love me. And I was angry at myself for caring so much about any of it. But I think there was something else too. I think part of it was the desire to have something that my sister didn't have. Information. Knowledge. The advantage of knowing what was coming before it came. The power of keeping a secret. In that moment, sitting in my father's study, looking at my father's will, I made a calculation. I decided that keeping this secret was worth something. I decided that the tiny advantage of knowing something my sister didn't know was worth the weight of carrying that knowledge. This was the worst decision I ever made. I left the study and I closed the door. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Not the housekeeper. Not my father's lawyer. Not Sarah when she arrived 3 hours later. I just went about the business of having a father who had died, knowing exactly what his death meant, and not saying a word about it. The next morning, Sarah and I met with the lawyer, a man named Hendricks who'd worked with my father for 30 years, in his office downtown. The office was exactly the kind of office a lawyer for a man like my father would have, expensive but not ostentatious, organized but lived in, the kind of space that communicated serious competence. Sarah was dressed in black. She looked composed, professional, like she'd already processed the fact of our father's death and was ready to move on to the practical matters. I looked like someone who hadn't slept. I looked like someone who knew something that nobody else knew. Your father, Hendricks began, was very clear about his intentions. I didn't move. I didn't react. I just sat there and listened to him read the will like I was hearing it for the first time. But I wasn't hearing it for the first time. I already knew. I already knew that my father had valued me at less than my sister. I already knew that he'd made a choice about who mattered more. I already knew that I was sitting in a lawyer's office and I was supposed to be surprised, but I wasn't surprised because I'd spent the last 18 hours carrying the weight of that knowledge. When Hendricks got to the part about Sarah getting Mitchell logistics, she closed her eyes. Just for a second. But I saw it. She closed her eyes and in that moment, she understood. She understood that our father had chosen her. She understood that everything she'd done, all the work, all the climbing, all the efforts to be the good daughter, had been worth something in his calculation. And I sat there and watched her process this, knowing that I'd already processed it, knowing that I could have warned her, knowing that I'd chosen not to. When Hendricks got to the part about me getting the remaining estate, I didn't react. I just sat there and heard it. I heard myself being valued at less. I heard my father's final judgment. I heard the thing that I'd already heard in that empty study, now confirmed by a lawyer in a suit. "Are there any questions?" Hendricks asked. "No," Sarah said. She opened her eyes. She looked different. She looked like she'd just been crowned. "No," I said. I looked at the door of the office, thinking about the study where I'd found the will, thinking about the envelope, thinking about the secret that I was carrying like a stone. We left the office. Sarah hugged me, an awkward hug, The kind that people give when they don't really know each other. She smelled like airplane and expensive perfume. "I'm sorry," she said. "About the split. I know it's not fair." She was apologizing. She was actually apologizing. "It's fine," I said. "It's what Dad wanted." "Yeah," she said. "I guess it is." And that was when I should have told her. That was when I should have said, "I found the will first. I already knew. I let you have this moment anyway because I was too angry and too hurt and too small to do anything else." But I didn't say any of that. I just hugged my sister and watched her process the fact that my father had loved her more, knowing that I'd discovered that fact 18 hours before she did. For the next 3 months, I carried the secret like a physical thing. It was in my chest, taking up space, making it hard to breathe. It was in my throat when I tried to speak. It was in my hands when I tried to do normal things. It was in my sleep, manifesting as dreams where I was trying to tell someone something important but couldn't make the words come out. Every time I talked to Sarah, and we talked fairly often, actually, during those months after Dad's death, I felt like I was lying. Because I was lying. I was lying by omission. I was lying by pretending that I'd heard the will for the first time when I'd really heard it weeks before. Sarah was dealing with her own grief. She was dealing with the company acquisition. She was dealing with the logistics of inheriting $28 million and trying to figure out what that meant, what she was supposed to do with that information, what it meant about who she was and what she was worth. She called me sometimes to process. "I can't believe Dad left me the company," she said once. "I can't believe he thought I was ready for that." And I thought, "You're ready because he decided you were ready. He decided that a long time ago. He decided it when you were 7 and I was born. He decided it every time you won something and he paid attention and you did something and he ignored me." She said, "I feel bad about the money split. I want to make sure you're okay." And I thought, "You feel bad because you know it's unfair. But you don't feel bad enough to question whether Dad's judgment was right. You're going to take the money. You're going to take the company. You're going to take all of it." She said, "Do you think Dad was proud of me?" And I thought, "He was so proud of you that he made sure you'd inherit everything. He was so proud of you that he spent his entire life validating you over me. He was so proud of you that his last act, leaving you his company, was the culmination of everything he believed about worth and value and who mattered." But I never said any of this out loud. I just let her grieve. I just let her process. I just let her believe that the will had been a surprise, delivered by a lawyer at a particular moment, rather than something her brother had discovered in the silence of their father's study. I went to work. I delivered mail. I came home. I didn't tell anyone what I was carrying. I built a wall around the knowledge and told myself that it was important that nobody knew about it. I told myself that the secret was mine. That having discovered the will first gave me some kind of advantage that I needed to protect. This was a lie. But it was a lie that I told myself, so I believed it. By October, Sarah had decided to leave her consulting job and take over the logistics division at North Shore Capital. She was ascending. She was becoming our father. She was going to spend the next 30 years climbing, just like he had, and she was going to get to the top of whatever mountain she was climbing, and she was going to look around and realize that she was alone, just like he was. I could see this happening. I could predict it. I could see the exact trajectory of her life stretching out before her. And I still didn't tell her about finding the will first. I don't know why. That's the thing that I've struggled with for 7 years. I don't know why I didn't tell her. Was I punishing her? Was I punishing myself? Was I trying to protect her from knowing that I knew? Was I trying to protect myself from having to acknowledge that the secret was a terrible thing to keep? I think maybe the answer is all of those things. I think I was angry and hurt and small, and the only power I had in the situation was the secret. The only way I could matter was by knowing something that nobody else knew. The only way I could be the chosen one, at least for a moment, was to be the one who discovered the will first. So I kept the secret. And I let it poison everything. In November 2019, 3 months after I found the will, Sarah called me about buying my apartment building. She was planning to invest in real estate. She had investors lined up. She was targeting commercial real estate portfolios in major metros. The building where I lived was one of those targets. It had good bones. It was fully occupied. It had steady cash flow. It had value-add potential. I'm planning to acquire the entire structure, she said. Renovate it. Convert it into a mixed-use development. Office on the ground floor. Residential on the upper floors. So I'd have to move, I said. Possibly. I haven't figured out the exact timeline yet. I understood, in that moment, what was happening. My sister was going to buy the building I lived in and convert it into something more profitable. And I would have to find somewhere else to live, because my living there did not maximize the return on her investment. When? I asked. When would I need to move? I don't know yet. Months probably. I need to finalize the acquisition, close on the property, figure out the renovation plan. This is my home, I said. The words surprised me. I hadn't known I felt that way until I heard myself say them. I understand, Sarah said. But it's also just a building. You can find somewhere else to live. I've lived there for 12 years, I said. I know, she said. But you don't own it, so you don't have any real claim to stay there. You have a lease, and we can buy out that lease. As if this was already something that had been decided, that I was just being notified about rather than consulted on. I don't want you to buy my building, I said. I understand that, Sarah said. But I'm going to buy it anyway. Why? Because it's a good investment. Because it has value-add potential. Because I can afford to. So because you can, you do. That's how business works, Marcus. This isn't business, I said. This is my life. Your life is in a building that you don't own. That's not actually your life. That's just where you happen to be living. I wanted to argue with her, but I couldn't think of an argument that made sense in the vocabulary she was using. In her vocabulary, everything was business. Everything was investment. Everything was return on capital. And I was standing in my living room, holding the secret that I'd been carrying for 3 months, understanding that if I told her the truth, if I told her that I'd known about the will all along, if I told her that my anger at her was rooted in something deeper than real estate, maybe everything could change. But I didn't tell her. I just said no. Over the next 2 weeks, I didn't hear from Sarah. I didn't call her. She didn't call me. We existed in a state of suspended communication, both of us processing the conversation, both of us waiting to see what would happen next. Then, on a Thursday evening exactly 2 weeks after her call, Sarah showed up at my apartment. I wasn't expecting her. I would have seen her if she'd called. But she just showed up, like she had been doing since we were kids, like the normal rules of friendship or relationship didn't apply to siblings. I opened the door and she was standing there in a black blazer and black pants, looking very much like a woman on her way to or from an important meeting. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. "Come in." She came in and looked around the apartment like she was appraising it for renovation potential. Which, of course, she was. It's a nice space, she said. It's home, I said. It could be so much more, she said. If it was mixed use. If we opened this unit into the one next door. If we put in a proper kitchen. If we renovated the bathrooms. It could be really special. It is special, I said. To me. Because I live here. She sat down on the couch. She didn't take off her blazer. She looked like she was going to conduct a business meeting, which, I realized, she was. The acquisition is finalized, she said. I closed on the building 2 days ago. You're now technically renting from me. I sat down across from her. Congratulations. There's more, she said. My team has begun the renovation planning. The timeline is aggressive. I need to clear the building within 6 months. I need all the current residents to vacate. All of them. Yes. I'm offering buyout packages to anyone who's willing to leave early. For you, I'm offering $100,000 to break your lease and relocate. She said this like it was a generous offer. Like $100,000 was a fortune, was compensation for losing your home. That's not enough money, I said. It's more than enough, Sarah said. You can find a new place. You can use the money as a down payment on a house if you want. You can invest it. You can do whatever you want with it. That's not the point. Then what is the point? I realized, looking at my sister, that I didn't know how to explain the point to her. The point was that I had built a life here and she was destroying it for profit. The point was that I didn't want to leave. The point was that she had already inherited $30 million and it apparently wasn't enough, she needed my apartment too. But there was something else. Something I couldn't say. The point was that I was tired of being less than. I was tired of being the sibling who didn't matter. I was tired of being the one who had to accept whatever was left after someone else took what they wanted. I'm not leaving, I said. I'm not taking your money. I'm staying. Sarah's face went very still. You're under a lease, she said carefully. I can legally terminate the lease. I don't care. You have to care. You don't have a choice. I do have a choice, I said. I can refuse. I can make this difficult for you. You'd sue me. If I have to. Sarah stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the street below, at Columbus in November, at the city that she had left and I had stayed in. Do you hate me? She asked. No, I said. I don't hate you. I think you're someone who was designed to want more and more and more, and that design is going to keep you from ever being happy. I'm happy, she said. No, you're not. You're successful. You're driven. You're climbing. But you're not happy. And you are. Living in this apartment, delivering mail, staying exactly where you've always been. Yeah, I said. I think I am. She turned to look at me. That's sad, she said. That's peaceful, I said. She picked up her bag. I'm going to give you 60 days, she said. If you haven't moved out by January 15th, I'm evicting you. Then evict me, I said. She left. She didn't say goodbye. She just left, walking out of my apartment and my life in the way that she'd learned to do efficiently, without wasting time on sentiment or emotion. And I sat alone in my apartment, in the space that she now owned, understanding that I was about to make this situation 1,000 times worse, and not doing a single thing to stop it. The next 2 months were strange. I continued living in the apartment. I continued going to work. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't look for a new place to live. I was waiting for something, though I didn't know what. Waiting for Sarah to back down. waiting for her to call and say she was sorry, waiting for some version of this story that made more sense. It didn't come. In January, I received a legal notice. Sarah was initiating eviction proceedings. The notice was very professional, very formal. It was signed by lawyers. It didn't have Sarah's personal touch. It was the bureaucratic version of what she'd threatened. I called her. She answered on the third ring. "Don't do this," I said. "I've already done it," she said. "You could take it back. You could call the lawyers and stop it." "Why would I do that?" "Because I'm your brother." "I know," she said. "And I respect that. But this isn't about you and me. This is about business. This is about the renovation timeline. It's always about business with you," I said. "Yes," she said. "It is. Because business is how you matter in the world. Business is how you build something that lasts. What about family? What about relationships? Those are secondary," she said. "That's what I learned from Dad. The thing that matters is what you build. The thing that matters is the legacy you leave." "That's not healthy," I said. "Maybe not. But it's effective." I hung up. I didn't call her back. I hired a lawyer not to fight the eviction, but to make sure I understood my rights. The lawyer was a man named Harrison who specialized in tenant law. He sat across from me in his office and explained that I didn't have much of a case. "The lease can be terminated with proper notice," he said. "Your landlord has given notice. Even if this seems vindictive, which, frankly, I think it might be, legally she has the right to terminate the lease and evict you. So I just have to leave." "You have options," Harrison said. "You could move and make her go through the full eviction process, which would take time and cost her money in legal fees. But that just delays things. Eventually, you'd have to leave anyway." She offered me $100,000. And I don't want her money. "Why not?" I realized I couldn't articulate this in a way that made sense. If I took the money, it would feel like I was accepting her terms, accepting that everything could be priced and bought. But if I didn't take the money, I was just making the situation harder on myself for the sake of a principle that nobody else would understand or care about. "Because it's the principle of the thing," I said. "Principles are expensive," Harrison said. "They cost you money, they cost you time, they cost you peace of mind. Are you sure this principle is worth the price?" I didn't answer him. But I knew that he was right. The principle wasn't worth the price. But I was going to pay it anyway, because that's what happens when you're tired of being moved around by people who love money more than they love you. During the eviction process, I never told Sarah about the will. I never said, "This isn't actually about the apartment. This is about me being tired of being invisible. This is about me carrying a secret that's been eating me alive for 6 months. This is about you taking everything, and me letting you take it, and neither of us acknowledging that something is profoundly wrong with that." I just said no. And I held on to my principle. And I refused her money. And I never told her the truth. The eviction hearing was scheduled for February 15, 2020. I showed up with my lawyer. Sarah didn't show up personally. She sent a lawyer, a woman named Prescott, who worked for a firm that specialized in real estate litigation. Ms. Prescott presented the case. It was dry, factual, unemotional. My lease had been terminated with proper legal notice. The landlord was exercising her right to regain possession of the property for renovation and redevelopment. I was a residential tenant with no legal claim to remain in the property. The judge agreed. He ruled in favor of Sarah. He gave me 30 days to vacate. I'll file an appeal, Harrison said afterward. But you should start looking for a place to live. This will probably hold. I didn't file an appeal. I didn't look for a place. Instead, I called Sarah one more time. You won, I said. I didn't want to win, she said. I wanted you to move voluntarily. No, you wanted me gone. You got me gone. Congratulations. Marcus. I'm going to be honest with you, I said. I hate you right now. I don't think I've ever said that before. But I'm saying it now. I hate what you're doing. I hate that you inherited $28 million and that apparently wasn't enough. I hate that you wanted my apartment more than you wanted to be my sister. It wasn't about the apartment, Sarah said. It was never about the apartment. What was it about, then? It was about proving that I could do it. That I could build a real estate portfolio from nothing. That I could outperform the market. That I could be successful. You've already proven all of that, I said. You don't need to destroy my life to prove it again. I didn't destroy your life. You lived there. You can live somewhere else. It's the same thing, I said. You took something I cared about and turned it into money. That's destruction. That's business, she said. Yeah, I said. I know. That's the problem. I hung up and I didn't call her back. I didn't answer when she called. I just went about the process of finding a new place to live, understanding that this was the end of something, not just my time in that apartment, but something bigger. Something about being part of a family that valued money more than people. I found a new apartment in early March. It was smaller, in a less desirable neighborhood. The rent was cheaper. It was adequate. It was not home, but it was a place to live. As I was boxing up my things, I made a decision. I was going to take the money that I'd inherited from my father. I was going to use it to buy something that couldn't be taken from me, that couldn't be developed into something more profitable. I was going to buy my own place, and I was going to own it completely. I called a real estate agent. I started looking at properties. With $3.2 million, I could afford something significant. Something that would hold value. Something that was mine in a way that an apartment in a building owned by my sister never would be. It took me 3 months to find the right place. It was a house, built in 1995, 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, located in a neighborhood that was stable but not trendy. It was the kind of house that would never be impressive at a dinner party. It would never make anyone want to know more about me. It was just a good place to live. I bought it for $280,000. I paid cash. I own it completely. I have a mortgage-free life in a house that has nothing to do with my sister, nothing to do with my father, nothing to do with the family I came from. When I signed the deed, I felt something release in my chest. A weight I'd been carrying since my father died, maybe since before that. I was free, finally, to just be myself, to not be defined by who my family was or what they'd achieved or how they'd valued me. But I was also alone. I was finally and completely alone in a way that I'd never been before. The last thread connecting me to my family had been cut. The last building I'd lived in that had any connection to my sister was behind me. The last possibility of reconciliation had been burned. And I still hadn't told anyone about finding the will first. By the time the pandemic hit in March 2020, I was already moved into my new house. I was already settled. I was already beginning the process of building a new life that didn't involve my family at all. The pandemic changed everything and nothing. Everything, because suddenly the world was different and people had to adjust to a new reality. Nothing, because my life didn't really change. I was already isolated. I was already living quietly. I was already not going anywhere or seeing anyone. I worked through the lockdown. The postal service was essential infrastructure. I wore a mask and delivered mail and tried not to get infected. I succeeded at that, at least for the first year. I didn't get sick. I didn't die. I just kept going. Sarah, meanwhile, was building her real estate empire. The pandemic had created an opportunity. Commercial real estate prices had crashed. Everyone was scared. Everyone was expecting the world to end. But Sarah saw an opportunity. She called me once during that time. It was a brief call. She said, "I'm starting a real estate fund. I'm investing in depressed markets. I wanted to tell you." "Good for you," I said. "I'm putting in 10 million of my own money," she said. 10 million. A third of her inheritance. She was betting it on the idea that the world would recover, that commercial real estate would boom, that her judgment about markets was better than everyone else's judgment. "That's a lot," I said. "It is," she said. "But it's also a significant opportunity." We didn't talk after that. She was busy. I was content to let her be busy. We existed in parallel universes, not speaking, not seeing each other, not being family in any real sense of the word. 7 years have passed since I found the will. 7 years since I decided to keep it secret. 7 years since my sister and I stopped speaking. I don't know if she knows that I found the will first. I don't know if she's ever wondered why I seemed to know exactly what the contents would be before the lawyer even opened it. I don't know if she's thought about the look on my face during that meeting. I know from social media that her real estate fund is struggling. I know from mutual acquaintances that she's trying to restructure her portfolio. I know that she's still climbing, still trying to prove that she matters, still operating under the assumption that worth is determined by external success. But I don't actually know her. And she doesn't actually know me. And it's because of a secret. It's because of a decision I made on one morning in August when I found my father's will on his desk and decided to keep it to myself. I'm 43 years old now. My sister is 46. We're both middle-aged. We're both probably going to spend the rest of our lives not talking to each other, not knowing each other, not being family in any real sense of the word. And it's because I found a piece of paper on a desk and decided to keep it to myself. 2 years ago, Sarah sent me a letter through her lawyer. She'd created a trust. She'd put $5 million in it. She wanted me to have it. The letter said, "I regret what happened between us. I want to ensure your financial security. I still love you, even though we haven't spoken in years." I didn't open the rest of the letter. I put it in a drawer. I'm still thinking about opening it. I'm still thinking about calling her. I'm still thinking about saying, "I found the will first. I knew before anyone else. I kept it secret because I was angry. I'm sorry. But I haven't done it yet. And I don't know if I ever will." Here's what I've learned from 7 years of silence and 13 years of carrying the secret of finding the will first. The worst decision I ever made wasn't refusing Sarah's money. It wasn't fighting the eviction. It wasn't buying my own house instead of taking her settlement. The worst decision I ever made was keeping my mouth shut. Because once you keep a secret, it becomes a third person in the relationship. It becomes something that lives between you and someone else, and it grows, and it poisons everything, and eventually you can't even remember why it mattered in the first place. My father built an empire and forgot to build a family. He spent 34 years climbing toward something that, in the end, didn't matter because he was alone when he got there. He died at his desk, working on business matters, with no one there who actually cared about him except his wife, who he'd spent decades not paying attention to. And I took that lesson and I inverted it. I decided that I wasn't going to climb, that I wasn't going to build an empire, that I was going to be small and quiet and content with my own life. But I was still playing my father's game. I was still making decisions based on fear of being valued less than someone else. I was still defining myself in relation to my sister's success rather than in relation to my own values. And the secret was the proof of that. The secret was me holding on to power that I didn't actually have. The secret was me trying to matter by knowing something that someone else didn't know. I know that my father made a choice when he left his company to my sister. That choice was based on his belief about who was worthy, who had proven themselves, who had the potential to continue his legacy. I know that choice hurt me. I know that it shaped everything about how I saw myself and my place in the family. But I also know that I made a choice, too. I chose to keep the secret. I chose to let my sister's joy be tainted by the knowledge that I already knew what the will said. I chose to make the eviction about something it wasn't actually about my anger and hurt, not about my actual attachment to the apartment. And that choice hurt her, in a different way. That choice meant that she never got to actually process what happened with me. That choice meant that she was always wondering why I was so angry, why I was fighting so hard, what the real issue was. The real issue was that I was tired of being less than. The real issue was that I couldn't admit that I cared about not mattering to my father. The real issue was that I was angry at my sister for accepting what my father had given her, and I was angry at myself for not being the kind of person who could accept what he'd given me. So here's my question for you, the person listening to this story. What secrets are you keeping? What advantage are you holding over someone you love? What piece of knowledge are you using as a weapon, disguised as a principle? Because secrets don't make us powerful. Secrets make us small. Secrets make us isolated. Secrets turn love into a thing that can't breathe. I would give back every advantage I had from keeping that secret. I would give back the power of knowing something my sister didn't know. I would trade all of that to have one honest conversation with her. But I can't. I can only sit here and tell you, don't make my mistake. Don't keep the secret. Don't turn knowledge into a weapon. Don't let the weight of what you know destroy the relationship that matters. Tell the truth. Tell it now. Tell it before 7 years have passed. Tell it before your sister becomes a stranger. Tell it before you realize that the only thing you won in keeping the secret was loneliness. I'm 43 years old and I've spent the last 7 years wishing I could go back to one specific morning in August 2019 and make a different choice. I wish I'd told Sarah immediately. I wish I'd said, I found the will. I know what it says. I want to talk about this. Maybe she would have felt guilty. Maybe she would have refused the inheritance. Maybe she would have tried to split it with me. Maybe we would have actually talked about something real for the first time in our lives. Or maybe she would have done exactly what she did, taken the money, taken the company, taken everything. And at least then, I wouldn't have had to carry the secret. I don't know which scenario would have happened. But I know that by keeping the secret, I guaranteed that neither of us would get a chance to find out. So here's what I want you to understand. The most valuable thing I own isn't my house, isn't my job, isn't my inherited wealth. The most valuable thing I own is the knowledge that keeping secrets destroys relationships faster than any amount of money can rebuild them. I'm alone now. I'm content with my life, but I'm alone. And it's because I decided, at a critical moment, that my anger mattered more than my connection to my sister. Don't make that choice. Don't keep the secret. Don't let knowledge become a weapon. Tell the truth. Tell it now. Tell it while there's still time to make a difference. Because that's all I would ask for now, if I could go back in time. One chance to tell the truth. One chance to say, I knew. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry I let the secret poison everything. But I can't go back. I can only go forward, alone, in the house that I bought, in the neighborhood that I know, living the life that I chose because I was too angry to do anything else. And I would give it all back, the house, the money, the peace, to have my sister back. That's the cost of the secret. That's the price of keeping quiet. That's what I learned in the 7 years of silence that followed the morning I found the will. So please, I'm asking you, don't make my mistake. Tell the truth while you still can. It's been 12 years since I found that will on my father's desk. It's been 7 years since I stopped speaking to my sister. It's been 3 years since she sent me the letter with $5 million, which I still haven't opened. I'm 43 years old. I own a house. I have a job. I have a quiet life in a neighborhood that knows me. And every single day, I think about that morning in August when I made the decision to keep the secret. Every single day, I wonder what would have happened if I'd told her. Every single day, I understand that I will probably never know. The question I've been asking myself for 12 years is this: was the secret worth it? Was the tiny advantage of knowing something my sister didn't know worth the cost of losing her? And the answer, every single time I ask myself, is no. No, it wasn't worth it. The secret didn't make me powerful. It made me small. It didn't give me an advantage. It gave me isolation. It didn't prove anything about my worth. It only proved that I was willing to destroy the most important relationship in my life to protect my ego. So here's my final question for you. What secrets are you keeping? And are they worth the cost? Because I can tell you, with absolute certainty, that they're not. Whatever advantage you think you have, whatever power you think the secret gives you, it's not worth the cost of the relationship. Tell the truth. Tell it now. Tell it while there's still time. Because I didn't, and I've spent 12 years wishing I could go back and make a different choice. Don't be like me. Don't wait. Tell the truth now.